Kia ora, I'm Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. No mai, hoki mai, everyone. Welcome to a part one of a two-part podcast that I had the great privilege to talk to Che Wilson, teaching me around the workings of the New Zealand rainforest, the relationship between water and the relationship between the plants. This was designed to help me understand the workings of a rainforest as collective intelligence is using nature to help us design our business to endure long term, to create a people ecosystem. And I was so privileged to be able to sit down with this very sage and knowledgeable man to teach me around New Zealand rainforest. My ancestors came to New Zealand primarily to cut down the rainforest. Che's ancestors learned to live in that rainforest for hundreds of years. And so for me, this part one and part two is all about learning the intricacies of that relationship. So listen up and enjoy. Kia ora, Che. Nice to see you.
Kia ora, Harv. Good to see you.
But my DNA, Che, is that of people from Cornwall coming over here to cut down the rainforest. That's in my DNA, and I don't know how to be in the rainforest. And that's what I'm reaching out for you, is to help us on this journey, and thinking that we might develop a series of conversations with you. And the ask is, can you help us understand what it takes to live within a rainforest?
I suppose the first point is it's good for you to talk about rainforests because most people think that we don't have rainforests here. And if we do, that they're only on the west coast of the South Island. But our bush is a temperate rainforest, so it's good that we're using the correct term because often we just call it the bush.
Yep.
And the other point you raised was whakapapa. And whakapapa, and another word for one translation for whakapapa is genealogy, the other is DNA. And so I have often said that we eat our whakapapa or we eat our pepeha. And when I think about a pepeha as a proverbial saying that identifies where you are from, the reason why I say that you eat your pepeha is because the food that you eat grows from the mountain and the river that you affiliate to. And the way you talked about your whakapapa to Cornwall, my initial response would be, you just be. But then when I work through what you're saying, I'm going, okay, that's probably a bit too simplistic to just be. But it's beautiful because even though I have whakapapa to this land for centuries, and in my tribal narratives, we've been since the beginning of the evolution of this landmass, from Tonganui and the great South Antarctic currents as this landmass emerged out of the ocean. And then more recently, the last wave of connection here, which was around 7 to 900 years ago, depending on which whakapapa lines you affiliate with. But then I also have connections to Bedfordshire, to Newcastle on the Tyne, to Scotland and to France. And so sometimes that whakapapa gets in the road of me just being as well. So I think the answer is simple and complex all in one.
Yeah. And as we've started this journey, and it's been really interesting because I feel 100% clear that we are in the process of developing a human rainforest, and we feel very, very comfortable in that. And there are so many things to help guide us and develop something that is truly regenerative, because my concern is some of the most successful companies in the world are also some of the most harmful companies in the world.
Yep.
And we have thought of that as success, that just making a whole lot of money and a whole lot of reach is a great thing, as a wonderful KPI, and yet they're really harmful to the world. And we have got to find models that we can turn the wheel of commerce, and the world is better off as a result. Not just being once we've made the money, then we become philanthropists, actually doing the good as we go through. I've now become really interested in this whole space, and we are learning more and more about mycelium and more about how this interdependence goes, because our model has always been based on biodiversity. So it's always been based on, as much diversity in a team. And we know that when you've got diversity in a team, it works better, works way better.
Yeah, definitely. And like I know my own experience with CQ back in the day, that diversity is the richness, and you can't actually buy that. We can try to make things, but it's the richness of the collective intelligence that takes people to the place where you then find some damn good answers.
And since you've been in a team, Chai, our diversity has grown. And 13% of our membership now is Māori, 10 or 11% are other ethnic backgrounds, and our youngest member has been 19, our oldest has been 73. We're slightly more female than male now, and we cover these 70 industries and professions. And while our model hasn't made sense to some in the past, it's starting to make sense more now than ever before.
Yeah. Cool.
And it's not just about diversity, because you've also got to have the space for people to be and to have that equity within the team, so somebody's not dominating.
Yeah.
Something that we're really interested in the regenerative system is the relationship, the subtleties that happen between in an ecosystem. Where you see it in collective intelligence, often the most powerful things are the really subtle things. So what are the key learnings for us to understand about a rainforest around that relationship between the rocks, the soil, the big trees, the lichen, the moss?
If you look at the word ngahere, or ngahere, that here means to bind or connect. And so the word for a native temperate rainforest here in Aotearoa's ngahere, which talks about relationships. And the relationships are outlined in the whakapapa, because what happens is te ao Māori, we personify everything. And what I mean by that is, this is the wrong word, we have a God for everything. And the reason why I say God is the wrong word, because there's only one translation for atua, and that's atua. And the most common term used to translate is God. But it has funny connotations. Anyway, I'll use it. So when we personify, we recognize that everything has a divine origin. And if you go back to the whakapapa of the forest, all plants, the soil, stones, rocks, all have a whakapapa back to a specific atua. And it's those relationships which our tupuna created so that we could understand the connections between them and the science related to those relationships. So that you have, like the one that's talked about a lot at the moment, is the relationship between Cody and whales. Because in our whakapapa, there's a relationship where they go back to the same source, even though one's on land, one's in the ocean. And so there's been a heap of research at the moment being done on what are the different things within the whale that could help with Cody dieback. And so there's some pretty cool work being done where they've realised that, yes, there are definitely some things from a scientific point of view where the whale, in particular the tohora, I forget what the English name for the tohora is, but for the tohora, where it can link to helping sustain the well-being of a Cody. And so when you have that system of whakapapa, it's no different to the periodic table, where you have, Mg, H, N, etc., O, which all mean different things. So does whakapapa. And whakapapa then provides a relationship where, yes, tōtara and rimu might come from Tāne as their father, as their paternal origin, but their maternal origin is different. And they might come from somewhere else. Let's say tōtara and a ponga. That'd be better, I'm safer there. And what it does is it just highlights that some things go well together. It's a bit like all of this new age planting system in your garden. There are good things to plant with. If you're growing some brassicas, then you might want to have some marigolds and a couple other herbs around so that it stops.
Yep.
All of that stuff.
Yep.
Exactly the same with whakapapa. And the relationship between the different plants highlights what works better. It's not that they can't work together, but what works better with each other. And because Mother Nature just does that beautifully, in a beautiful interconnected tapestry, I think as we do future planting projects as communities, as DOC, as councils, as farmers, we probably should be looking at the whakapapa rather than just saying, oh, this, and this are really good for the bank. But if we looked at the whakapapa of the different trees, it may help with the bank, but it might also help other things. Because if you look at, I was walking last week through this nice little bit of reserve in Hamilton, and really, really lovely. But the problem with these man-made reserves that we're creating is most of them have no ground cover. And so the ground is almost similar to what happens in a mono species forest, like a pine forest.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And in addition, we plant close so that for the first 2 years, aesthetically, it looks lovely. And then they start to grow all over each other. So I think looking at relationships will help us to better understand where we connect and what works well with each other, because everybody loves, the average New Zealand story will always talk about a beautiful lemur and the other podocarps, when actually they are referred to as rākau rangatira, and they're referred to as rākau rangatira, different to taonga species, because taonga species is a conservation concept which has just got a Māori name to it. So it's an idea that's come from elsewhere. And Māori have just picked it up and run with it and said, we'll call it taonga species. I'm not very sure how Māori it is. But the rākau rangatira, they are nothing without all of those that are on the outskirts of the forest as windbreaks for those rākau to grow. And there's a saying that my aunt used to always talk about, because her daughter's name is Maurea, Maurea. And Maurea, I love it, it's a beautiful name. It talks about the importance of the little trees and how they help to prop up the trees that are in the middle that will grow and one day become the canopy. And so that's a story of not only support and connection relationship, but it's also a story of endurance where, okay, you just got to wait, and you just got to hold that wind off as this one here slowly grows and takes 70 years to become mature. But, whether it's the moss, whether it's the roots, whether it's stones, soil, leaves that fall to then help become a natural mulch, the birds and the insects, the cobwebs, all of those things, that is the ngahere. It's not just the trees. The ngahere is everything that makes up the well-being of a forest. And that changes with altitude and it changes with location. Because I know at home you can't have a Nico growing anywhere because it's too cold. You can't even have kawakawa growing at home because it's too high, too cold. And I know here in Hamilton, the only toy you'll find will be if it's been transplanted here. Otherwise, it'll be at the top of Pirongi out my window. Otherwise, you won't find toy in Hamilton City.
So I've just spent a few days up in New Plymouth, and to see the nikau growing there, to see the ferns growing there, just naturally, it's just fabulous. And it's and that's a wonderful thing with the rainforest. If you create the environment, it's amazing what seeds, because the seeds are everywhere.
The Nico has a certain modi and is an indicator, because where the Nico does grow, it's usually quite a lush forest if it's growing naturally there. And so, yeah, it's an indicator that the forest is doing well.
And Che, when we develop collective intelligence teams, it is interesting to see, it's really unpredictable when you put people together where the spark is going to be, where that connection is. And one of our facilitators, Sarah Tocker, often talks about putting the people together who do know with the people who don't know and treat them as equally when you're trying to break down complex things, right? Because you don't want all the same.
Yeah.
If you have a whole lot of people who did know, you're just going to end up with the same solutions over and over again.
With a bunch of know-alls.
With a bunch of know-alls. But it's really, it's really interesting, Jay, that how often do we design teams of people who know about the subject?
Yeah. Which is why there's a framework I've shared online. I call it the Ariki model, which can put people off because there's a big debate, do Ariki exist still? And an Ariki was a paramount chief of sorts. Whereas it's important for us not to compare an Ariki with the aristocratic models of Europe, but to compare it with the Pacific models, if we can find any that haven't been corrupted by Western ideology. And when I think about the Ariki model, there are certain leadership roles, and they are all quite diverse and different. And it's no different. And if you don't have that diversity, in addition, they're female and or male. So this whole idea of Māori being patriarchal is a load of bullshit. It was created by the ethnographers and anthropologists of Europe who wanted to try and influence our way of being. And we're taking some time to go back to our more complementary model. But that's part of the journey. And the reason why I talk about this Ariki model is because what the Ariki model does is it highlights the importance of diversity. And when you have the diversity there, you then get the symbiotic, interconnected, interdependent space rather than an independent pine forest. Because all you're going to grow is pines. And the moment that your economy no longer wants pines, you're going to struggle for a decent amount of time or fall over. Whereas if you have more diversity, that allows you to be able to pivot. And in Te Ao Māori, been working, everybody knows about the tangihanga model. And I call it a tangihanga muscle. Got that term, muscle, from a woman by the name of Sasha McMeeking. And the tangihanga muscle is the ability to respond to an emergency with no budget, no plan, and the ability to execute on budget, sometimes with a profit, perfectly and completely over in no more than a week without any planning. And the only infrastructure you have is a marae or a home, because you can still do it in your home as well. But there's a tangihanga muscle which requires 3 key leadership roles. A leadership role in the front, a leadership role in the back, and a dot joiner between those two. Somebody who's going as the go-between. And the rest relies on whoever turns up and that are willing to work to the cause rather than for position. And that's replicated on that symbiotic relationship in the forest, where you help each other. If a bit of land is slipped, the roots from other trees will try and keep another tree who's falling off, will try and hold it on until there's a build-up of soil again. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but you would have seen, anybody who's seen slips with a bit of bush on it will see that there's always a couple of trees trying to hold on to another so that it doesn't fall. And that's that tangihanga muscle where you're going in to help the cause rather than the pursuit of position. I'm not saying that the pursuit of position doesn't happen, because it does, but that's where diversity helps, because it's in the diversity that they then get put into line by someone they may perceive as the lowest of the low, but actually there's no low, there's no high, because that flat model is all about getting the job done to uphold the mana of that cause and to embellish the mana of those that come as visitors. And I suppose a very strong matriarch calling all of the shots behind those other two who might be the recognised leaders.
I mean, Che, that's what you've just described is very, very similar to how we operate collective intelligence teams. There is no, we don't have any status in the teams. Everybody is there. We believe in equity. We believe in everybody having a say, and is trusting the process, trusting our work, and also not knowing what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah. And I think leaning into the unseen doesn't need to be a spiritual experience, but just trusting that the process will get you to a result. And I think that's key. I've spoken to many people about something we do at home, and we run our hui by consensus. Oh, you'll get nothing done. Oh, talk too much. When I think in the last 13 years, an issue might have been returned probably 3 to 5 times in the last 13 years. Otherwise, it's spoken about. There might be challenges. And then they make a whakatau. They make a determination. And I use the word determination rather than a decision, because a determination can change later on as well.
Che, I realise, decision is an interesting word, and I've realised recently that how harsh some of our Western words are, because the word decide means to kill off an idea, right? You side is death, and decide means I'm going to do that, and all this other options and no more, where the word choose or determination is quite different, because you can change your mind.
Yeah.
When I choose to do this is quite different than I decide to do that. But what I've realised, Che, since we've been on this journey with the regenerative journey, with collective intelligence is you start noticing how abrasive the Western language can be. And I think that organisations, when you hear the word restructure and KPIs and structure, and these can be really quite abrasive. And it's interesting. When I hear them now, I go, "Ooh, that sounds harsh," and they don't feel natural and they don't feel regenerative.
Yeah. Well, I know in the case of a determination is e tupu I tau wakatupuranga. You have to grow in your time, in your generation, in your try and think what's another word for reanga, but in your time, in your generation, and there's no actual expectation that tikanga will stay the same or that a determination will hold. There is an expectation that relationships are maintained even if a determination changes, because the relationships will hold you through generations, whereas a decision can sometimes just be transactional. And so there's no expectation for tikanga to stay the same, but our interaction with the Western world has made us translate some of our ways of being and doing with terms like protocol and custom, which infer that you can't change them. When actually tika, which is the root word of tikanga, tika is, in a broad context, to find balance. It's often just translated as correct or straight, when actually tikanga is through dialogue, you make a determination that ensures balance within the group. And I think we learned that from the relationship, the here, within the ngahere. Because the ngahere is interdependent on each other. Even the smallest seedling or spider are essential to that portion of the forest. And part of that, and I deliberately use the word essential, is because the forest has an ancient memory. So 20 years is nothing, which is why I say it's essential. Whereas man might think, hey, the fact that a tuatara can take 70 years before it reaches maturity is just part of the journey.
Yeah.
And when it's a couple of 100 years, might be ready to use.
I would love to learn more about the role of water, of why within a rainforest.
Water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink, says the rhyme of the ancient mariner. And I want to start there because the view from my tribal origins, from the Wanganui tribes, is that Tangaroa, Atua te Moana, God of the sea, as my tribe says, is God of water. And when I say God, I don't mean Neptune. I mean Tangaroa is water, both fresh water and salt water. But the interplay between Mother Earth and the other elements, and how fresh water comes out of the earth or falls from the heavens and then ends up in the domain of Waitai or Waitota, Waitai, Waitote, salt, as a journey which helps connect it to ngahere. And even though whanganui we say, ko tangaroa te atua te wai, tangaroa i te wai Māori, tangaroa i te wai tai. So we say tangaroa is the domain of water, tangaroa of fresh water, tangaroa of salt water. But when you look at our whakapapa, we then break fresh water into being looked after by Tāne. Tāne who has dominion over the forest. And Tāne marries or mates with Tāne, the progenitor of life, mates with high altitude, let's just call it that, or the mountains, hine tupari maunga, tu maunga. And from there they have parawhenua mea. And parawhenua mea then has domain over fresh water. And so straight away, that wai connects to Tāne te waiora, Tāne the giver of life. And Tāne is often referred to as Tāne Mahuta, overlord of the forest. But because these atua have multiple names which describe a Māori form of scientific definition for different components of the universe. What water does is it has a close relationship with Tāne. And if Tāne is the overlord of the forest, then water must be there. Because even though on the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, it's talking about the fact that as humanity, we can get ourselves into spaces where we run out, where we have worked so much going the wrong way, we then deplete resources. What Tāne Te Waiora teaches us is that wai must be ever present, and that we must be connected to both the seen and unseen, so that even when we are out in the ocean, we can find the parts of the ocean where freshwater spouts are spewing out freshwater in the middle of the Pacific. And there are stories, there are narratives of our ancestors knowing that. And I know our cousins from the Solomons, especially our cousins in Micronesia, they still know those maps, where I think we're relearning them. But they still know those maps. And thankfully, the likes of Mopialag, who helped to revive ocean navigation from the 1970s onwards for Polynesia, he came from the Solomons. So they might be open to sharing a bit more with us, who knows. I wanted to go there first, simply because if we think of water and forests, it's easy to not think of the ocean. But there's an interconnection between inland and coastal and out on the ocean afar. And what that connection is the flow, where the forest will help filter, which is why Tāne Te Waiora is the term for Tāne, the giver of life, because it's through the connection with the plants and the rocks, the roots within the forest that create a mauri or an essence that helps to sustain life. And that water flow through the forest not only helps deposit water into the moss and other parts of the forest so that it's there for times of need, but also it helps to remind us that that same filter system works through our body, which is why the different parts of our body connect to the different atua that are out in the environment. And so the water that flows through us is tangaroa. So all fluid in us has salt, which is why when we're in hospital, we get given saline, because it's tangaroa and the mana of tangaroa flows through us. But it requires a connection to Tāne to help filter, to ensure that vitality of life is there. And whether that's tangaroa i te wai Māori and freshwater rivers, or whether it's subterranean waterways, and what's her name? Pūmanawarua, she looks after the subterranean waterways. But the soil that she flows through and the caverns, the ana, the awatua that she flows through are all part of ensuring that what we see on top thrives. Where we get to a state of running out of water and all the boards did shrink, as says in the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, that's when we get to a state of today, where we've had a way of being where we mistreat the water, where we mistreat resources, and therefore our mother is now struggling. And so are her children. And yes, we're the youngest of those children, but our ability to stroke our own egos means that we then don't look after the iti maurea that I referred to in the other session, where the smallest of trees helps to prop others up. And I think what we've done is we as humanity think that we are both the proper upper and the big one that's going to take the most sun. And if we learn to observe and notice that the wind's been blowing, over the weekend was a good time to do some gardening, but because the wind was blowing here in Waikato, I thought even though the moon's good, I'll wait. Which doesn't actually work with my Christmas dinner, but nature's just telling me to wait, so I just got to wait. And what I do know is that in the waiting, she will respond by giving later, but I just have to wait. Coming back to water, water comes in many forms, and not only just the rain and from the ground, but then there are different names for different types of water as it comes out of the ground or as it is captured from falling down. And so, the dew will capture a certain type of water. And so you could, in the past, get different lichens so that in the morning you could just brush your lichen over and capture the dew and squeeze it, because that water is often seen as the best water, tō mairangi, and that which has been drawn down from the heavens. And other different types of water, because different trees will hold on to water so that if you're in need, you go to them. And it's by knowing the whakapapa of those trees that tells you, like your periodic table, that tells you, you can access water from that tree. Or this one holds fire really well. If you're worried about the fire going out and then you're having to start over again. And it's that whakapapa that takes us to knowing. The key challenge is relearning all of the codes. That's all it is. Relearning and remembering to remember.
Che, we see that in the teams, and it's something I learnt only a few years ago, that I didn't realise that the plants share water. When you've got a diverse sward of grasses and trees, they will share minerals and they will share water, and they will communicate with each other under the ground. And this is a hard concept for an old white guy to comprehend, but once you start seeing that, it is phenomenal. And the whole point of a regenerative sward or forest is that plants need resources at different times, and we see that in collective intelligence teams, the sharing of resources which can come in lots of different forms, and why that getting away from monocrops, mono design, mono management teams, mono leadership teams, because when you've got that mono system and something's depleted, they're all depleted at the same time.
Yeah, and that sharing is where the tangihanga muscle comes from, is because you're working to a purpose, and so the purpose requires sharing. And so people will not just bring money in the form of a koha, they'll bring food, they'll bring their time and energy, and they'll bring their love. Or they'll send one of those, so that at least a family member is represented to help contribute to that purpose, to the collective purpose. And that's mimicked from what you just shared.
Che, what happens to a forest when water is scarce?
Me ka mimiti te puna wai, ko mate. You die. You die, and what happens is they don't necessarily leave the one furthest out to die first. They will die in groups as they try and sustain each other. And they will see that they're struggling. They will try and help. So much until they can't. And then that puts pressure on them. And sometimes they might go first. But this whole idea of survival of the fittest, I think that's definitely a human-centered view of us interpreting what animals are doing, what we do, and possibly a means to justify our selfishness. Which is why if we go back to Tāne Te Waiora, Tāne the giver of life, and Waiora in Te Ao Māori, there are a number of words for well-being. The most common word is hauora. And most people say, what's the Māori word for health? Hauora. And sadly today people think of hauora and they think of Western medicine. Whereas hauora was physical health. And waiora is the end, which is just vitality. And Tāne, as one of his names is, Tāne, the giver of life or giver of vitality. And if we wrap back to that, because the why is the key word in that, without why, we are nothing. And you just need to break it down. 70% of our body, 70% of Papatūānuku is why. And without why, it's a waste of time.
Jay, what's to finish the session off? In the collective intelligence framework, how do we make the most of that why? As we build this human rainforest, how do we conserve, how do we make the most of that why?
To be honest, I think you have to go through a process of every year where you are only living on, for a weekend or for a week, X containers of water. That teaches us how to remember what's important. The fact that I get to go to a number of marae that are still based on rainwater, reliant on rainwater. Farmers are used to it. If they don't have a bore, if they don't have a puna, they're used to living like this too. But the rest of us who live in the cities, I think the sooner we get to a place where new houses also run off rainwater from the heavens, that will help relieve all of our rivers. It will help relieve a lot more of the system. And we might be able to give it back to one of the places that needs it most, which is our repo. Because the repo, the wetlands, were, if you had a wetland in your tribal area, you were seen as wealthy. Because of the importance of the water both under the wetland and flowing through the wetland, and the amount of food that comes out of, and resources that come out of, not just fish, but waterfowl and other birds, and then all of the different shrubs that you can use, not only to eat, but to also make resources out of. If you had an area of wetlands, you were very wealthy. And then first thing we do when we start making funds, we drain them all.
Thanks, Che. Anything else we need to discuss about why?
Oh, we could talk forever on why.
Yeah.
because it's so important. And I suppose to finish off, there's a saying that our kuia, our female elders, would always say, ko te wai, ko te ora. It's that simple. Water is life. Without it, we're fudged.
Ka pai.
So everybody, I really hope you enjoyed that. It is such a privilege talking to Che, knowing what depth of knowledge he holds. It is iconic. It is one of the few people I know in New Zealand that is able to share that knowledge from that particular wonderful Indigenous framework and understanding. And Che, thank you so much for your time. You're incredibly generous with it. And everybody wants a piece of Che Wilson, and I can understand why. Such a wonderful man. And thank you, brother, and looking forward to part 2. Thanks for listening in. We're Collective Intelligence, a one-of-a-kind people ecosystem that takes inspiration from Mother Nature. To find out how we reimagine leadership development, visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz.